Today's guest is David Aaker, author, thought leader, educator, branding consultant, and vice chairman of Profit.
Dave, I am honored to be spending time with you this morning. I can't wait to hear what you have to say, how your perspective have changed, and I heartily say welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Oh, well, I am too. I am too. And this is in many ways, I would call it a momentous occasion because next month we'll mark the launch of your 11th book on marketing, the second edition of Aaker on branding, which arrives 11 years after you published the first, which must mean something mystical about the number 11. But you certainly admit that a lot has changed since you wrote the first edition. And I think we're all aware of everything from, information overload, acerbic social media, consumer skepticism. So let's jump right in, so we can talk about how branding may be different now, or how contemporary branding maybe is responding to these shifts. So
Yeah,
over to
I
you.
think that just reflecting on these 11 years, and during that time, I wrote three books, one on stories, one on disruptive innovation, and one on social purpose. But um, the uh, the striking thing is how much is the same. You still need a brand that resonates, that differentiates, that intrigues, that inspires and engages. And that's still true. And some of the things you do to get there are still in play. But there are three major differences that I see. They're not really differences. It's just that three issues have been magnified all of a sudden. And one of them is this hyper dynamic environment that we're in strategically, where there's all this disruptive innovation has always been the thing that's fueled growth and so forth. But it now is occurring much more frequently. It's occurring much faster when it does get there and with much more impact. So the dynamics are now uh, much more of a factor than they were. And so the challenge for branding is to become a player. Because if you look at all these great books on disruptive innovation, Blue Ocean and Christensen's books and so on, they don't mention branding. I mean, Blue Ocean has a half a page on being the pioneer in a market, half a page in the whole book, and Christensen has nothing. And the reality is that it's all about branding because in a disruptive innovation, you have to become the exemplar brand. You have to position the whole subcategory, not just your brand. And you have to build barriers. You have to evolve the positioning statement, and you have to brand the innovators and what I call branded differentiators, branded energizers, branded source of credibility. You have to brand them. And that's one of the lowest hanging fruit there is in branding today. The second thing I see is the uh, the fact that we're in such a hostile communication context, information overload, um, uh, media clutter, and skeptical audiences, and so how do you break out in that environment? And the traditional media doesn't work. The idea that we're going to tell customers what we think they need to know, that doesn't work. So it becomes a premium to really learn how to do that, how to do it in such a way that you're a friend and a mentor and not a lecturer, and do it in such a way that engages actively the audience. And so we have to, things like events take on new importance, things like brand communities, the ultimate form of loyalty takes on new power. Um, and uh, so we have to really, really look at the stuff that we're doing and see if we can make it. We have to use stories because stories break through. They avoid counter arguing. We have to think about the use of humor and um, and brand personality. So the third thing, and that's all things we've always had in the back of our mind, but now they're front and center. The third thing, and this is something that I and others thought we kind of had put behind us, but there's short-termism. that keeps raising its head. And it's driven in part by big data and analytics because they have all kinds of short-term variables to work with. And that's all they have to work with: sales, leads, stuff like that. And so we have this perennial problem that is now more prevalent, and that is, how do you demonstrate that brands really have value? And one of the things I did in my first branding book, Managing Brand Equity, is I put forth uh, the reasons brand have value. Like, just to be visible gives you a feeling of familiarity, which is valued. And you look at each component of a brand, and it's really amazing how it can affect a relationship of an organization or a business. And and then we have to um, uh, figure out how to develop really, you have to raise the bar, raise the bar in terms of the quality of our creative and the quality of our programs to build brands, because when the really great programs will have a short-term effect as well. And so, and the second thing we have to do is to make sure that short-term programs don't get out there that are off-brand, that are damaging the brand.
Well, no, you raise a lot of points in a very short time. It reminds me of something the Internationalist does, an annual survey that's called "What's on the Minds of Marketers," and one of the things that seems to come out all the time is people agree that it's not innovation itself; it's also the speed of innovation that's something that drives them, crazy, or at least something that's now a key part of their jobs. So I think you're right. I mean, I'm always quite intrigued by that balance between the fundamentals that don't change, but also, just given the situations, how they evolve. Now, before we go to the book itself, just a quick question. All right. So how do you define a brand now?
Well, I don't really define brands. I think a brand is just a symbol that tells you who made it or who stands behind it. But what I do define is brand equity. And so that's how the brand creates value. And so I now talk about the brand equities having three pillars. One is what I call brand relevance. And that's a little bit different than brand awareness. It's really two elements to it. It's brand awareness in a certain context. So if you have high awareness in your hybrid car, that doesn't mean you're going to have high awareness when it comes to buying an electric vehicle. So it's in context. To be relevant, you have to be visible in that context. And the second thing, you have to be credible. It's not enough to just be known. You have to be credible. We used to have a concept called the graveyard. That's brands that are well known, but nobody ever thinks of them when it comes to buying, um, like Dodge or something. Anyway, the idea is to make sure there's no reason not to buy, no reason not to use, and if you lack that problem, you're going to be credible. You have to say, this is something that I know will work. I don't know if it's going to be better or worse than other options, but I think it would do the job. The second element is brand image, and the idea of image is not about functional benefits only. It's about self-expressive benefits, about social benefits. It's about emotional benefits, and it's about ways to create relationships that go above just the transaction, the functional side of things. And the third thing is brand loyalty. When I first defined brand equity in that first book, Managing Brand Equity, I departed from Kevin Keller, a whole bunch of people at the day who defined brand equity as awareness and image. And I said it includes brand loyalty. And that has turned out, not just me thinking, but the concept has turned marketing around completely. I mean, not just 3 decades ago, marketing was middle management. Marketing was concerned with awareness and image, which is all a communication problem back then. It could be delegated to an ad agency. And all of a sudden, marketing got elevated to the C-suite. It was now there in the form of CMO or VP of marketing, and it was engaged in strategy. It brought to the table things like segmentation, customer insights, the customer journey, customer interactions, and suddenly, marketing is strategic, was helping to dictate what the new offerings would be, how the offerings were changed, and it changed everything for marketing. It went from tactical to strategic. It went from middle management to top management, and that was because it now was concerned officially with brand loyalty, and that puts so much on the table, and it gets us so close to how brands contribute value too, because they usually do it through brand loyalty.
No, it's interesting that you say that, because now you hear more people talking about wanting to have customers for life, and figuring out ways to achieve that. Maybe obviously the customer might go through different life stages, but it doesn't mean they don't offer a legacy to their next generation or something in terms of their views of the brand. It's that is something. It's funny because I hadn't necessarily heard how that fundamentally changed marketing, but I see exactly what you mean. Let me just go to something that's in the book, because I believe that in this second edition, that your 5 B's of branding are you've probably integrated them in a way that's a little bit different this time around. Now, I think you might have touched on some of them. Can you talk about why this coming up with the 5 B's of branding is so important, and maybe just quickly?
Well, I've always been inspired by the 4 P's of
Yeah.
marketing, which
Yes.
are really flaky. But anyway, I didn't let that hold me back. No, what I wanted to help people see is that it's so tempting to regress and assign marketing back to awareness and image, and that's your job, and run those ads and do whatever else you have to do. And I wanted to make sure that people were aware that you have to check more boxes than that. And so the first B is brand equity, and the concept is so powerful. It's so organization changing, and that is, a brand is an asset. A brand isn't just something that enables or something that supports. A brand is an asset, and it's to be leveraged, it's to be protected, it's to be invested in. And so just the concept that it's an asset, and that I have, throughout my books and my career, I've talked about ways you can communicate that to your colleagues and to others, to preserve the investment and to protect that from. I mean, we talk about America and what's being done now to damage that brand, and people don't understand that brand is an asset, and if they would know that, then they wouldn't do these things. And so anyway, that's the first one. The next 3 are these components of brand equity. What is a brand equity that you're trying to build and protect? It's, again, brand relevance, it's brand image, and it's brand loyalty. And those are your asset of values. And it's really important that it's not just awareness, it's relevance. It's not just awareness and image, it's also brand loyalty. And we have to understand brand loyalty and create it. And then I added a 5th one, and that's a brand portfolio. Because what I've observed again and again is that people think the brand is an entity all itself. It's a silo in the farmyard. It's just, you build that silo, you build that brand, and you're done. It's never the case that a brand is all by itself. It's never that case. It's in a context of a portfolio. And so a brand doesn't have to stand alone by itself. It's going to have an endorser. It might have a sub-brand or a series of sub-brands, and it might have co-brands, and they all help to create that brand. And the hardest thing about a brand is to be differentiated. They can create that differentiation, and it's so hard to do it by yourself. And then the lowest hanging fruit of all is the idea that you got a secret sauce. You got something really good. You've got something that you can articulate in 90 seconds that's really powerful. You need to brand it, because without a brand, it's so hard to communicate. It's so hard to understand. So I developed what I call silver bullet brands. They're branded differentiators, branded energizers, and branded source of credibility. And once you brand it, you can own it. Once you brand it, you can communicate it. Think of Uniqlo and Ares and Mahitech, and think of the Prius and the hybrid Synergy Drive. And you just need to brand it. And so the brand portfolio is something that feeds your ability to create brand relevance, and it feeds your ability to create brand image, and it feeds your ability to create brand loyalty.
No, that's well, for something very complicated, you've expressed it very well, in terms of how one inspires the other and builds on the other and creates a whole picture. You also said something in the book that I smiled at. You actually quoted Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead and said, and I'll read it. You don't want to be considered just the best of the best. You want to be considered the one and the only one who does what you do. Now, I think that line feeds in very much to what you were saying just now about some of the silver bullets and so on. Now, that's what you call disruptive innovation, but why is that so important now? Is it because it's so cluttered and so on, or is it just the essence of branding now?
Yeah, I wrote a book called Brand Relevance, and then I wrote a book called Owning Game-Changing Subcategories. And the thesis of those two books is that if you look at category after category, and I've done a lot of work in Japan, and I got a hold of 35 years of beer data in Japan, and the market share trajectory only changed 4 times in that whole time span. And they were all due to either a new subcategory being formed by disruptive innovation, like Asahi dry beer, or categories were repositioned, like Asahi was at one point. And then I looked at 24 other categories, and it all seemed to be the same, that anytime you see a spurt of sales, it was because there was a disruptive innovation. So then that's why I got into the book. And what I concluded is that my brand is better than your brand, which is the heart of brand preference competition, which is mostly what we do, just never generates growth. It almost never generates growth. It's just astounding how it fails to generate growth. And what does generate growth is disruptive innovation. And so actually my book is adapted to Indian. We're retitling it to Branding and Disruptive Innovation, because that's really what the book is about. And so the idea is that if you really want growth, you have to have a disruptive innovation. If you really want differentiation, you need to have that. And then once you decide that, as I said earlier, you need to use a brand to become an exemplar and position the whole new subcategory, the disruptive innovation. And second, you got to build barriers. And one way to do that is to brand the innovation. And the innovation could be a way to to interact with the customers, or a style, or some values. It doesn't really have to be directly related to the offering.
So it's interesting because it makes me recall, for example, when P&G launched a product like Swiffer. And one of the things that they talk about is that even though that came out of research and finding a new way to dust and to, so on. What was also very interesting, though, is that those innovations grow categories, not just for that brand, but overall. So does it does that disruptive innovation, I know you talked about it could be a new way to handle customers or interact and so on, but does that come with necessarily new product development most of the time?
Oh, no, no, it can be one of the most interesting things. It can come from social programs. I mean, if you make bar soap like Dove or Lifebuoy, you can't possibly, there's just no way to create energy for your brand. There's no way to create differentiation for your brand. There's no way to create any communication that would people care about. It doesn't matter how much money you spend. It's just not possible. But if you create a program like the Real Beauty program that Dove's now has been around for almost 2 decades, and has influenced literally hundreds of millions of women and girls, and have created so much energy and image lift and engagement for Dove that they've grown sales from 2.6 billion to 6.5 billion, and it's all on the train of Real Beauty. It's all due to that. And well, they've expanded their product line and they've expanded their geographical presence too, but it's mostly on that idea. And so that's now a point of differentiation for Dove. It's a relationship that other people don't have. Um, and Lifebuoy, another bar soap in India, developed a Help a Child Reach 5 program, and they put a video describing how this program affected some women in 3 villages. They got 44 million views from those videos. I mean, just think about it. You can't get any visibility for a bar soap by talking about bar soap.
No, you make a wonderful point, and Dove is a brilliant example. And now it's also evolved onto online issues and online bullying over beauty, and some of those initiatives are just amazingly touching. And the Lifebuoy is just another extraordinary example. No, I'm glad I asked that because when you hear innovation and disruptive innovation, you always think of something new, but I love the way that you tied it to social programs. Let me jump ahead a little bit. You had mentioned, or behind and ahead, how about that? You had mentioned when we talked about your 5 Bs, you mentioned the 4 Ps. It's kind of interesting because I think it was just last month, Kotler, who is often associated with the 4 Ps, announced that there's a 5th P. And that 5th P is purpose. Now, I found that the timing kind of interesting, but nonetheless, and I would have thought that if you were adding a P for purpose, it might have been maybe 10 years ago. But nonetheless, I'd like to, since you did mention social programs and how they can be great differentiators, I'd love to get some of your views on purposeful branding. I mean, does purpose still matter today?
Oh, it really does. And my take on purpose is that sometimes you have a purpose that can encompass social, programs and the business. But sometimes you need a social purpose and a business purpose. Like Salesforce, for as a business purpose, they connect customers, and they have a social purpose, and that's using software for the social good. And so there's that. You sometimes people, sometimes purpose and mission get in the way because people say there's you got to check the box. You need a purpose, and they try to create a purpose, and they weren't able to generate a good one, so they generate a mediocre one, and it does more harm than good. And so a purpose can just be magical if it clicks internally and externally, but it takes a lot of effort to get there. And I think more people use mission than purpose, and that's okay. They end up at the same point eventually, usually, whether they call it a mission or a purpose. But yeah, it does. There's the old story about this architect in 1692 that was walking down the street and asked people, what are they doing? And one guy said, I'm laying bricks and look how good I'm doing. And the next guy said, when asked the same question, I'm building a wall, and look at how straight and fine my wall is. And they asked the third guy, who said, I'm building a cathedral. Well, people want to work for companies that are building cathedrals, and they want to have a relationship with brands that are building cathedrals. And especially if you look at the employees that are 35 and under, they really are not interested in improving sales and profits by making more widgets. They're just not. And so and customers are in that way too. And of course it's only a few of them that may have this influence their loyalty and decisions, but it might be 5%, 15%, 20%, but that's the difference between making money and losing money. And so it's really important. And some of these people are not only a part of your customer base, they're influencers. And so it really can pay off to have a social purpose and have social programs. But now I have a whole theory about that's in my social purpose book, and that is that if you look at companies out there, they are almost to an organization, bought into the idea of doing social good. And but if you look at what they are doing, it's always grants, volunteer programs, energy goals, and those things are they reek of sameness. They look ad hoc. They're not memorable, and they're probably not very impactful. And they look cynical if they do attract attention. So what I argue is you need signature social programs, ones that are visible, that do feel real, that are inspiring, and things like the Dove Real Beauty program or Lifebuoy's Help with Child Refine. And then they have to be branded. They have to be branded. And if they don't have a brand that emerges, then and it doesn't have to be a brand they generated like the Real Beauty program. It can be a nonprofit they adopted. Like Thrivent, the financial services company, adopted Homes for Humanity, and they've been with them for nearly 2 decades. And for their 2 million members of Thrivent's customer base, that is really an important part of the relationship.
No, you bring up a very good point. And I think one of those points, of course, is that it's hard to make that kind of message click, that purpose message click. You said that a lot of the things that seem like doing good are indeed checking the boxes, as you've mentioned it before, and they're undifferentiated, and that's perhaps the easy way out. I mean, it takes tremendous digging. There's probably purpose message fatigue because of the sameness element to it, as opposed to having real creativity associated with it, or even, as you said before, humor or something that might be, somewhat more memorable. And I get the feeling that, we're even living through a purpose gap where some expressed values don't always marry up with actions. So that's challenging. It's hard to do purpose right. But in your book, you also talk about branding is hard. Now, talk about that, because a lot of people would argue that in a direct-to-consumer age, where you can just, click onto Shopify or do create an identity with WordPress or something, that it's probably easier because of all these digital tools we have. But you make it clear that branding is hard, and I think your example of purpose shows that branding is hard. So talk about that. That sounds like something that has not changed at all.
Well, what I encourage people to do is to figure out what is what is it that really resonates with a customer and differentiates you, and try to come up with 3 or 5 things. It's never just one thing, and maybe 3 or 4 others that are less important but still relevant, and then put a brand on that, a label on that, and it's just not easy. One of my people I've worked with is the Berkeley Hall School of Business, because I was associated with them for so long. And so we worked for years to create a brand vision for them. And and in every business school was about globalization, entrepreneurship, social programs, and uh, they're all the same. And so what Haas did was to come up with 4 pillars, but it literally took 3 years before they struck gold with one that emerged out of second tier to first tier to the most differentiating, resonating thing in all of business schools, and that's confidence without attitude. And that was just a home run, but it took 3 years to generate it. A lot of trial and error. Let's try this, try that. What's working? And that kept coming up, and that was such a differentiator for the Berkeley Hall schools, because the Harvards, the Stanfords, the Whartons of the world had an attitude. The students and the faculty, and it's not at Berkeley, and that was such a differentiator. But my point is, it just didn't spring up. We did just happen a week of let's do a workshop and come up with what we think. But it has to be based on stories, and there has to be. I come back to my silver bullet idea. You need branded sources of credibility. I mean, the Real Beauty campaign is a branded source of credibility for the purpose at Dove. And that purpose would be just an empty sentence now if it wasn't for this branded source of credibility and branded differentiator as well.
No, you make the example very clear. If you don't mind, I might share an example. You talked about universities. There was a university in Peru that gave me the inspiration, oddly enough, for our Marketing Makes a World of Difference initiative. It was called UTech, University Technological. Anyway, what they did was they wanted to attract students who really wanted to play with technical innovation and do some good in the process. So they did a contest among the students to see if they could come up with a device. What one student did, and this was essentially a communications tool for the university, but it was a billboard in the driest part of Peru that took humidity from the air and converted it into actual water, so that local residents who had to walk miles for water could get a new source of water from something as technologically easy, apparently, of creating this humidity grabber within an outdoor billboard. And even though it was an amazing, media feat, it also drove just so much, so many more students to this university and became such a differentiator. And that was one of the things that got me thinking about, as I say, that marketing makes a world of difference. So not to divert too much, but, if you're the internationalist, sometimes you have to tell a story from Peru,
Well, that brings up a whole nother topic. And I was inspired by my daughter, who taught a course on stories. And I just got into stories. I wrote this book, Creating Signature Stories, and it's just amazing, the power of a story. And I'm going to remember that story, weeks and months from now. And I just will.
I might even now, in a modern world, send you the video of it. So you never know. But
stories are so powerful, especially in this day and age of media clutter.
Yeah. So I wonder, can stories be told as video, or should they be told human to human?
Well, that's really a good point. In fact, back in the 50s, sociologists discovered the power of word of mouth, and they did all this research on word of mouth. the bottom line was it really works. But yeah, what was I going to say? What was your question?
Oh, I was just saying stories.
Oh, yeah.
Is video as powerful as human to human?
Oh, yeah. So the question is, everybody sort of acknowledges that. The question is, why don't people use stories more? And one reason it's not so easy to come up with good stories. And the B2B companies have hundreds of stories usually, but they're all watered down and they've taken all the tension, all the character development out of them. And because they're B2B and they know everybody's rational and they think they can do that. But the second thing is that once you have a story, you have to tell it, and you have to find a way um, to express it. And it might, and now you're back in do you use a video? Do you use a printed word? Do you use face to face? And how do you tell the story? Do you get your employees so ingrained in it they'll tell each other this story? Yeah, that's not easy, and
No,
you're not
no,
staffed for
it's not.
that. And the people that are on staff, that's not what they're good at. And so people are now hiring reporters and so forth for their marketing department to do that, to get the stories out there.
Well, hey, as long as they're clear and objective, that may not be bad. Look, we could talk forever, and I have a feeling that we might, in terms of making this a bit of a series. But let me just close out with one last question. You know, as that we kind of touched on when we talked about storytelling, whether it's through video or person to person. You know, there's no conversation about the future today without mentioning AI. So, do you have any thoughts on how human and technological collaboration can work to create maybe better branding outcomes, or how it has changed branding?
Well, there's definitely an upside to AI, and everybody in our industry that creates ways to communicate with customers have benefited from it, because a lot of the stuff we did, the research, the background, the insights, can be done much more efficiently now with AI. And even the creative, we can, I tell AI to generate 20 taglines. And so, and two or three of those are useful options, and it just accelerates the creative process. So there's that. The second thing it does is it makes some of these disruptive innovations possible, because one of the reasons that we have more of these, they're more impact, they work faster than before, is because of digital. And it's because of e-commerce, it's because of social media, it's because of the Internet of Things, but it's also because of AI. That all those things have enabled us to do things in the way of putting forth new offerings, or linking those offerings to customers and creating relationships. So yeah, the AI is definitely got a driving force role in our world as well.
Well, we'll leave it there for the moment. And I hope that will encourage everyone to delve into Aaker on Branding Volume 2 with a bit of a gap in between, but one that I think you've pulled together so much density on this subject that it's certainly, it's not only must reading, it's really such an important framework for thinking. And if a book can do that, it's pretty extraordinary in this day and age. So congratulations on I think it's your number 11 marketing book, but also I'd love to have more of your insights on so many subjects. It's been an absolute pleasure spending some time with you.
Yeah, it's definitely been my pleasure, and I look forward to some more.
Wonderful, wonderful.
The Internationalist focuses on the continual reinvention of marketing by highlighting inspirational marketers around the world and their ideas as they move the industry forward.
Internationalist Marketing TV shares these perspectives through interviews and personal stories. Thanks so much for watching. If you find this kind of content helpful, please click like or subscribe. Again, thanks so much.